What's up, everybody? You're listening to Salah's Corner with the one and only Salaah Muhammad. So, another episode coming to you from the quarantine zone. We are still practicing social distancing. We're still trying to bring you quality content and good conversations. And with that theme, I brought an interesting conversation of an individual I met through a different connection. His name is Ken Good. He's on the board of directors for the Professional Board of Bondsmen out of Texas. And we had an interesting discussion on bail reform, what true bail reform looks like, from his perspective at least, and how we can really go about tackling an issue of systemic criminal justice issues that plague particularly people of color. And, you know, throughout this conversation, I think it's goes without saying that there are different areas that we did not agree. But I held back on any criticism and high critique just to get an understanding of his perspective. And I think that goes with establishing dialogue with someone who you disagree with. It's very important to understand how to establish that dialogue first before you try to poke holes in their beliefs and their theories, and try to figure out how you can actually work together, especially when you agree in different areas. And I think in today's age, that is incredibly important when we talk about improving society, when we talk about improving the quality of life in people who are plagued with these systemic issues. So think about that as you go into this conversation and see if you can't find different ways where you may possibly agree. Here at Salah's Corner, I am always looking to connect with new people, hear new perspectives, and share new stories. And right now, I want to hear from you. Email me at realtalk@salahscorner.com, and we can get your story featured on our next episode. If you don't mind, why don't we start from the top from your background, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I grew up in a small town, farming town, peanut farming, and there was 24 people in my class in high school. 4 of us went to college, and I had an interest in going to law school. My mom and I used to watch Perry Mason together late at night. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't go directly to law school. I taught high school for a couple of years. Both my parents were public school teachers. Mm-hmm. I got a master's degree, and then I went to law school. Joined a firm in Tyler and practiced with the same group of guys for 20-something years, learned how to practice law. And during that time, I represented a few bondsmen who had some issues, and after that, word spread and, just developed into a practice where I have a large clientele for, bondsmen or insurance companies who have agents who write bonds, and have developed that practice over the last 15 to 20 years.
And you wrote this article on bail reform and what true bail reform looks like. And talk about, I know here in Philadelphia, that's one of the biggest things right now is how do we reform our bail system for a community that is severely underprivileged and really sometimes can't afford bail. Some have proposed that we remove the costs related to bail reform. What is your ideal for reforming bail so that it works?
Well, I think we should start with what is it that we're seeking to do with true bail reform. Are we trying to, I think the goal should be improve the criminal justice system. And we need to do a better job at getting cases through the system, getting justice for victims. And as a side part of that, we need to make sure that we don't take advantage or even forget about the poor. They need to be protected. I think the problem that we're having is that we're putting what I consider to be one of the elements of criminal justice reform and making that the sole focus, that we need to focus on fairness. And as a result, when we do that, we're actually making the system much worse because we're creating situations where the criminal justice system really can't function. People are not showing up for court. I know we have issues with people who say they cannot afford a bond, but like here in Texas, affordability is one element that we consider in setting bond. It's not the only element. It's not the thing that determines whether you get out of jail. Because if you do that, then you're turning your criminal justice system into a voluntary process. You have to agree to come for the court to mete out punishment. Because if you're too poor to get a ride, then it's not your fault if you don't go to court. If you're too poor, you don't have child care. It's not your fault if you didn't have child care and you can't go to court. And we then make it so much relative. I mean, so relative. That why do we even have a criminal justice system?
So it sounds kind of like you're saying, or you're making the argument really that we need almost criminal justice reform before we even tackle the bail issue.
Well, I think that's really what our advocates are asking for. They're seeking criminal justice reform, and that we shouldn't have punishment for certain crimes because there's an explanation for why they were doing that. And look, there are many social ills. There are schools that are failing in inner cities. There's drug use. That's increasing. We have families that are failing, and those are substantial problems. But I don't think bail reform is the place to address those situations. The job of bail is just to get somebody to court, so the court can have a hearing or have a trial to determine guilt or innocence. The better an improvement to the criminal justice or an improvement to the bail system would be get the cases through quicker and so that the cases are resolved, so they know whether they're going to be punished or whether they're going to go free. I mean, that's what an improvement to the bail system is. I think our friends are using the cloud of bail reform to really push a bigger criminal justice reform. And I don't think the bail industry would even oppose a top-down review of do we really need these issues to be crimes anymore in the future.
That's interesting. I often have discussions with folks on getting, building coalition building in a sense. There are advocates for criminal justice reform all over the country, but coming from different avenues and coming from different backgrounds. Here in Philadelphia, bail reform is a focal point, like you mentioned, to addressing a larger systemic issue of criminal justice and not seeing the benefit of possibly working with others who also want to see criminal justice reform, but finding different ways to tackle that problem. That really just begs the question, as obviously we won't solve the problems of criminal justice here in this conversation, but what are some of the things that we should consider when we talk about criminal justice reform? Because I feel that's what this really boils down to, because for a lot of folks, before they are introduced to the bail system, it's some of the structural failures in our criminal justice system that's putting in that place to begin with.
Well, we have so many things that we should be discussing, and we've been needing to discuss for decades, because I think a lot of people would say we have a problem with a certain race, or with certain races have bigger problems. And I think we should look at it differently. I think it's an inner city crime problem. I think it's where all the other races or other races that can afford to have abandoned the inner cities, and that the ones that are left, which is our high crime areas, is because, they're faced with failing schools, so they can't get a good education. They're failing families, so they can't get a good example at home. And they're looking at drugs around them everywhere they go. And so they're having drug issues that are dramatically increasing. And in our inner cities, we're not doing very much, or we're not doing enough to address those situations. All we're doing is leaving them to percolate and bake and get worse, and then we arrest them when they violate a crime. How do we address those things? I don't think it's really true, but there used to be a myth that we would determine the number of jail beds we need based on, third grade reading proficiency or third grade dropout rates. I don't really think we have dropout rates in third grade because that would be against the law.
Right.
But reading proficiency, if there was a kernel to truth to that, then we should be spending a lot more on education and on supportive programs for families. I think that those are things, the biggest mistake we make in the criminal justice system is that we are afraid to show any discretion. If you go and if you're in prison and you get a high school diploma, that's probably the biggest determining factor over whether you will come back to prison. And you should be shown compassion for showing self-improvement. But have you seen in all this bail reform, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, we're not doing any of that type of review. We're just en masse releasing people of the same, of the same category. And we should be looking for rewarding people who want to become productive members of society, and giving them a leg up and a chance to change and come back and not come back into the system. And we should not be giving that same compassion to people who are thumbing their nose at us, and when they get out, 37 minutes later, commit a new crime.
I completely understand the point you're coming from, because that you know, in order to address the problems within the system itself, right? In order to address why people can't afford bail, you have to address what introduced them into the criminal justice system to begin with. 100% agree. However, when we have systems in place that don't make that easy, do we then abandon those folks that have been introduced to the criminal justice system when they could have possibly been guilt-free of the crime that was committed, but now have to go through this issue of, I can't post bail, I can't get out of jail, I've then lost my job, I've lost childcare, I have all of these other issues that start to take hold in my life because of the way our bail system is also set up. And so, yes, going back, if I was never introduced to the criminal justice system through different means, sure, we can address it then. But at some point, I'm here. And where is my saving grace in that moment?
Well, I'm going to come at this a little bit different. And I hope to surprise you, because I'm going to argue that the reforms that are being advocated by the bail reform movement are actually making the situation worse. The exact situation you're talking about. And the reason why is, what is the problem in your area? What is the problem? The problem is not, you do have poor people, but the problem is, how do you process large numbers of people through the local jail quickly, cost efficiently, and how do you figure out who's who? How do you figure out which one needs a little extra time? The reform that's being advocated by the bail reform movement have actually made it impossible to do that, because they've gotten rid of bail schedules. The bail schedules, you can say what you are about they're not fair, but they allow people who can afford to pay for a bond to do that. They avoid going into the jail, and so the ones that are left are the ones that need the extra time to determine, okay, why are you here? Do you need to be diverted for a drug issue, a mental issue, or are you claiming poverty? Where the bail reform advocates, I think, have created chaos is they've gotten rid of the way to divert large groups of people away from the big population areas, and they've dumped this whole system on magistrates that can handle it. And so they've been forced to just release everyone. And that is a recipe for chaos, because you don't know who's who, you can't keep up with them, and nobody comes back to court, and they just commit more crimes. That's the lesson of Houston. It's the lesson of New York. And New York was so bad, even during the COVID-19 crisis, a majority of the legislature voted to repeal or pull back many of their reforms, roll back.
Let's talk about that moment, because I think that brings us nicely to what we're experiencing today. And so many governors so many activist groups are calling for a mass release of a lot of prisoners. And I understand the fear on both sides, right? There's a fear that crime will rise. There's a fear that people won't answer to the crimes that they've committed, because, essentially they will just go AWOL. But then there's also a fear of mass contamination of COVID-19, not just in the prison population, but through guards who are then bringing that home to their families and bringing it back to the communities. What's your take on how we should be focusing on this problem given COVID-19?
Well, I think you set out the problem really, really well. And I think the only thing I would add to it is you've also got the counties' fears that they're going to be paying for ventilators for inmates it looks like if you're going to be a ventilator, you're going to need one. It's going to be for a couple of weeks. And that's very expensive for a county to have to pay for. So you've got the perfect storm. And So what should we be doing? Because there's a new study a new article that just came out in the last few days that said in 4 states they tested numerous inmates, thousands of inmates in the prisons, and found out that 97% of them were asymptomatic. They had no symptoms. So, I mean, you could turn that completely around and say, are we releasing large groups of people that are infected and have no symptoms into the population? And so it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And so I question, we have jails are always fighting infection. We have, they had the H1N1 virus, they had SARS in our history. They're always fighting tuberculosis in prisons or other transmitted diseases, but viruses are always being things that you're on the lookout for. Chickenpox is a problem in jails and in prisons that they're always on the lookout for and fighting, and they have protocols for following that. I think that the problem that I've seen is that I think we're reacting with fear and also being bullied a little bit by our advocates for change who see this as their golden opportunity to push for what they wanted. And I think they've gotten a lot of it, and not so much in Texas, but in other areas. I mean, look at Washington State, which was 1 vote away from releasing a serial killer from the Washington Supreme Court because of what I would argue is fear. We have to make decisions that are thought out. And the biggest problem for any criminal justice system is when you release somebody and their case isn't over with, is how do you get them back? And New York and Harris County, the places we watch, if you're just going to release them, then you've got at least a 50% failure to appear rate. That does a lot of damage to the system because every case has to be put on hold where they fail to appear. And a lot of times, the only way they come back is by committing a new crime. So we're doing substantial damage to the criminal justice system when it finally comes back online. And we don't realize, and the ramifications of these decisions are going to be felt for a long, long time. And my biggest thing that I'm pushing for is we should be making decisions that take those things into consideration, and I don't think we have. I don't think we have at all.
Let's talk about what has happened in Pennsylvania. So Governor Tom Wolf has ordered the release of over 1,500 prisoners, I believe, with a focus on them being not being convicted of non-violent offenses, right? So if you are a violent offender, you will not be a part of that segment of the population that's possibly to be released. And then also, if you were, I believe it was 9 months. If you were set to be released or you had a parole hearing within the 9 months, the next 9 months, you may possibly also be set to be released. Do you think that takes more into consideration as far as who we're releasing back into society? Would you take that a step further and looking at individual cases before, setting a number on the number of prisoners to be released? What is your critique of that approach?
Well, first of all, I don't have a very good opinion about when they say nonviolent offenders, because they always say it's nonviolent offenders. And, we've had that issue in Texas where they start out by saying it's nonviolent. And then like in California, they downgrade a bunch of felonies to misdemeanors and call them no longer nonviolent. I think we should have started with an individual review of people. And I like even the 9-month thing that people are set within the next 9 months. I like that better, but I would attach on top of it an individual review. People could be doing that from homes. What's the assessment of the people that are taking care of these people? Have they shown an ability? I mean, what if somebody, here's the situation we've had. They've done a categorical release of people that fit in certain parameters. Well, what if they don't even have a place to go? I mean, we're just releasing them, and we're telling them, well, to observe your 6 feet distancing requirements, even though you have no place to go. We're making those quick decisions on categories because we're trying to figure out how to meet some goal when we should be relying upon the inside data and looking for people who show and have family connections and that will have places to shelter in place at, and who are not going to be sitting, wondering what havoc they can create. I think we should be spending more time exercising our compassion on an individual basis instead of a block basis. I really do.
I agree. Actually, I think if we approach this, like you said, with compassion, I think it allows for a much more nuanced approach instead of a blanket system that, many fall under the umbrella, even though they may not necessarily fit directly. Not only does it endanger possibly releasing folks back into society, but then also allowing folks to feel helpless once they do release them, because, like you said, do they actually have somewhere to go? Do I have a home to go to once I'm released from prison? Do I have a family or society to go back to? Or am I being released to ultimately commit more crime and end up back where I started from?
Well, I'm sure, like in y'all's area, I'm sure they're doing the same thing they're doing here. Is they're not arresting for certain offenses right now.
That's correct.
And so you have to be real careful when you're releasing people, when you're not doing an individual assessment of them. You're going to be releasing people who are looking at this and going, okay, here's the list of things I can do, and I will not be rearrested. And then you couple with that, you've got, family issues where, people have been told to shelter in place with the people who are tormenting them, and you've seen family violence, grow just across the world during this time. And when somebody gets out for compassion, commit a new crime, then compassion should end. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing they're just being released again and again.
That you actually brought me right to my next section, actually, which was, like you said, we are doing that here in Philadelphia, where our commissioner has declared she's not going to be arresting for nonviolent offenses. They will be stopping and asking those individuals, processing and then release, and having warrants issued for them after the stay-at-home orders have been lifted. Do you think that also, when that first rolled out here in Philadelphia and in a lot of other cities, there was a huge public outcry on the fear that, crime would rise, but it's been the opposite, really. Nonviolent offenses have dropped dramatically. Calls to 911 regarding those have dropped dramatically. There's a lot of folks that really talk about how, if you have less of a police presence, crime will rise, especially in urban communities, especially in high poverty areas. And it almost speaks to the opposite of that. What's your take on just how we are approaching this from a criminal justice reform standpoint?
Well, I think we have to be very careful when we talk about crime has gone down, because I think of course, crime is going down if police is not arresting people. I mean, the question is, what about reports? Are reports of crime going down? Like in New York City, in the last couple of weeks, there was an article saying that reports of crime on business is up 75%, which makes sense. The places that are empty are the businesses, because people are sheltering in place. And so I think that there's a certain amount of crime. I think you have to agree that has gone down because we have people that are not moving around. But I don't think that we can just say that crime has gone down. I think that what we can say is reports of crime have gone down, and we're going to find out as people start moving around whether crime has gone up or not. And I think domestic violence cases is an exception. And the longer we go, and I think that's one of the pressures on reopening, the longer we go, we've got mental health issues. People are just got stir crazy. They got cabin fever. I mean, I've seen it in my own family where you just want to get out, and your own mental health is required. There was a story the other day where someone went to a local police officer, and he said, I just killed my dad, because they were sheltering together. And so in our area, we're seeing murders going up. Domestic violence is going up across the world, not just in Texas, because, these are people sheltering in place with their tormentors. And I think that's going to get worse. I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing pressure to reopen. And so I think it's a fallacy to say, and I don't think that I would agree that crime is going down. I think that reports of crime absolutely are going down. But you also, it's almost contradictory. And you'll see in one paper crime is going down. You see another reports of crime is going up. And how do you reconcile them? And I think you reconcile them with, of course, crime is going down because they just got through saying they're not going to arrest people. So arrests are down. But what about reports? And then let's see what happens over time. And over time has not been good.
My final question, going back to bail reform And essentially, your what it feels like your argument is that we need more folks, we need more people in the system deciding on the intimate details of individuals when they're introduced to our criminal justice system, right? When you're arrested, we need to figure out what the root causes of what's happening, as far as like why you may not be able to show up for court, why you can't afford to pay your bail or bond, and having a much more nuanced approach to individual cases as far as a system-wide complete reform of how we approach bail reform. And I think that's the same, not just on bail, but on criminal justice, on how we're releasing prisoners during COVID-19, and then also how we are policing folks and how we are pursuing arrests during this time as well. Is that the argument that you're making?
I think that on the criminal justice reform, I would agree. I think on bail reform, I'm different. And the reason why I'm different is, I look at what has worked in the past and what have we ever tried. And what I'm arguing is just releasing everybody does not work. And in our large population areas, you can't individually magistrate everybody. Our friends on the other side said that they had developed this risk assessment. It was going to be the panacea. It was going to solve everything. We could get rid of the bail industry. And in the last 8 months, the bottom has fallen out of that. The research scientists have said, do not use risk assessment for criminal justice reform. The largest technology companies in the world have said, don't use risk assessments for criminal justice or bail reform because they're good at determining what groups do, but they're terrible about predicting what an individual would do. And I'm a great example of that. Grew up in a small town on a farm. The risk assessment, the group would predict that I would never go to college. I would never go to get a master's. I would never go to law school. But it was completely wrong with me on the individual basis. And so if we can't use that, what are we left with? Of everything that's been tried, it's only releasing everybody. And that's been proven to just be a fiasco. So we have to go back and look at what works. Bail schedules allow us to get out the people of the system that can afford to, so we can focus our time and energy on what to assess mental health issues, drug issues, and poor people to determine what they can and cannot do and what they need to address their issues. And we need to be able to call out people so that we can spend our time on those groups. And I think we need to be laser focused on ways to do that. And that's what bail reform should focus on. If we're trying to set up a system that is just fair to everybody, that means that you're arguing that everybody should just be released. That means your criminal justice system will shut down because it can't operate. You're going to have a 50% failure to appear rate, which I think in your area, you've had periods where you've seen that. And I think you just don't realize that you can't get justice for victims. And that's not bail reform.
I mean, there's a lot of folks that will argue that's a tactic that they're looking towards, right? Is to have a mass release because of how the criminal justice has treated poor people, has treated minorities and black people and other people of color. What do you say to that as being a tactic of bringing down the criminal justice system?
Well, I think that is the consequence of just releasing everybody. I mean, look, the purpose of bail is you get out of jail and that you agree to come to court at any time there's a need for a hearing. That's really all that the bonding industry does, is we get people to court. We do it very well. That's the reason why we've been around for 200 years. If all we did was take people's money, we wouldn't be in business still. We have the highest level of supervision. We remind people when they need to go to court. We go get them because they don't have a ride, and if they fail to if they miss court, we go get them and encourage them to come back and get them back as quickly as possible. Sometimes because of the relationship we have with them, the trust they have with us, they will come back quicker. If you just say, well, we're going to release everybody, the story of New York is that if you just release everybody, then you have no accountability. It's really just a concept of, are we going to have a system of accountability? Or do we have to have blanket compassion and we can't ever end our compassion? If someone is a repeat offender, if they fail to show up for court, then we have no choice. If you're just releasing everybody, then you can't end your compassion. So here's my best example. We show you compassion. We give you a PR bond. And 3 weeks later, you don't show up for court. Okay? Well, what do? We've issued a warrant. He gets rearrested. He comes back into the system. Do we give him another PR bond? He has shown he has not been successful. What if it's the second time that he's failed to appear? Do we give him a third PR bond? He has shown, or she has shown, that they are not successful on that system. They need something additional, more supervision. But on the mass release program that's being advocated by our friends on the other side, you have no option. You only have to continue mass release. And that's where we have a problem. Like officers in New York who are saying, we're not doing any law enforcement. We're arresting the same people every day because we arrest them, take them to jail, they get released, and then we start all over the next day. It's the same group. And so low-level career criminals learn how to just take advantage of the system. And that causes problems to the criminal justice system as a whole, because look at Harris County. They've been doing this for about a year, and their numbers of pending cases for misdemeanor courts have doubled. Now, criminal cases, the number of pending cases can't double every year. That means cases are getting resolved because every year on average, the same number of people get arrested, and then you hopefully resolve the same number of cases. Well, that means double the cases were filed than what was resolved. And if you have 2 or 3 years of that, then the whole system shuts down, and then you have chaos. And that's where we see the system going if you just have a let's release everybody approach. That's why we say call out the people that can call out as many people that you can fit into categories so that the magistrates, the system, can focus their compassion on the limited number of people that are left, that they can say, why are you still here? And we have a lot of different suggestions on how to keep track of that. But just mass release, it hasn't worked so far anywhere where it's been advocated.
Ken Good, Board of Directors for Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Thank you. I'd like to invite you back so we can have a deeper conversation on criminal justice reform, if you'd like to come back. Oh,
absolutely. I've always said we are more than welcome to talk to anybody. I believe we have the winning argument, and I don't have any problem defending it, but I always try to be respectful, but I can be convinced, too. I mean, we're always willing to find a middle ground.
Yeah.
So we'll talk to anybody. We love, and I've enjoyed talking with you today. You've been very nice.
Thank you. I think, I do have some folks that are a part of the Philadelphia bail reform here in the city of Philadelphia. So if you're interested, maybe the three of us can get on the call together and really have a heartfelt discussion about this, because I do think, I think it's important to always converse with people you disagree with, because that's actually how progress is made. And like you said, finding that middle ground is so much more important than just kind of sticking to your gun points. So I thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, I would love it. Absolutely love it.
All right. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you and your family stay safe.
Likewise. Thank you very much. Once again, I want to thank Ken Good, Board of Directors of Professional Bondsmen of Texas, for joining me in a conversation on bail reform, which kind of led to criminal justice reform and his beliefs on how we should be tackling this systemic issue. And again, this place, we try to engage in conversations with people we disagree with, not to knock down our arguments, not to have a debate, but to engage in dialogue. And I think that is, I can't say it's enough. It's incredibly important. It's very easy to discuss things with people who you agree with because they agree with you. It doesn't offer a challenge. It doesn't offer a critique. It doesn't offer you to think critically about anything because you already agree. I think it's much more important to have conversations and dialogue with people who you don't agree with, who come with it from a different perspective, and who offers an outsider's take, in a sense, on how we can tackle an issue, especially when we both agree on what the issue was. And I think as we got to the root of the conversation, well, we both had some agreement that criminal justice needs to be reformed, particularly in communities who are plagued with poverty, who are plagued with failing schools, who are riddled with drugs, who are affected by broken homes. I think that's incredibly important. And I think Ken and I both agree to that. I think fundamentally we may disagree on how we get there, but that's a conversation for another day. Feel free to email me at realtalk@salaahscorner.com. I want to hear your takeaways and your feedback on how we should reform criminal justice, how we should reform our bail system, if we need any reforms at all. And feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Salaah's Corner is recorded out of the quarantine zone right now as we try to get through this pandemic. Produced by producer extraordinaire Bree Wilson. I want to thank you always for tuning in. And until next time, peace, y'all.